And let's go live to CP24's Christina Tanalia outside the Sheraton Center, where the rally in support of CUPE education workers is underway. Christina.
Yeah, Scott, so education workers gathered here, teachers and parents came to show their support. And I want to point out that no one was obligated to be here. It is wrapping up is what I meant to say. This rally was underway for a good chunk of the last hour and a bit. No one was obligated to be here because tomorrow education workers are required, as per their union, CUPE, to hit the picket line. But those that came here today came to have their voices heard. So I want to break down some of the legalities and questions that many have around what has been going on. So I want to introduce Simone Ostrowski, partner with Whitten and Lublin Employment Lawyers, of course an employment lawyer herself. Simone, thank you so much for joining us here in the middle of this rally, so I appreciate it. To start, I want to remind our viewers that Bill 28 has passed. This is the legislation that imposes a 4-year contract on education workers. It has received royal assent. It is now law. Simone, what legal authority does the government have to impose a 4-year contract on education workers? And what's the point of collective bargaining if the government's going to step in and say, we're throwing this contract on you and you have no choice?
That's a good question, Christine. Thanks for having me. Historically, I believe the goal is for the government, of course, and the unions to come to a negotiated agreement without the need for the government to have to impose legislation forcing the workers to work. And of course, unfortunately, we've seen situations in the past where the government has said to the unions, unfortunately, we're passing a bill, you cannot strike, you have to go back to work, and we're forcing you. It's usually come after a period of protracted negotiation that doesn't result in a deal. It's usually a last resort. And of course, the union, if they feel that the bill forcing them back to work has been unfair or violates their constitutional right to collectively bargain or to picket, then they can sue the government. They can bring litigation against the government in court for violation of their constitutional rights. And we have seen that litigation be successful for the unions, and they've actually received damages from the government when a court has sided with the union and said the government took away the union's rights to meaningfully collectively bargain.
And Simone, what you're referring to is 10 years ago. This was a battle between, at the time, the Ontario Liberal McGuinty government and ETFO being a teachers union, not education workers. And the government had to pay the teachers back more than $100 million. So is this something you could foresee CUPE pursuing? I mean, is that a lot for the government? Like, that's a huge sum of money.
For sure, it's definitely a large sum of money, and it's meant to be a deterrent for governments in terms of not violating Canadians' constitutional rights. It has to be a large financial penalty, the theory goes, in order for governments to be dissuaded from instituting unconstitutional laws in the first place. But what's different is with this Bill 28, the government has invoked the notwithstanding clause in the Constitution that basically allows the government constitutional rights.
Simone, sorry, I may have lost you there for a moment. I wanted to ask you about the notwithstanding clause. In your opinion, as an employment and labor lawyer, was this a suitable use of the notwithstanding clause? Because what we're hearing from constitutional law experts is this is not what it was intended to be used for as part of the Constitution.
Yes, that's a good question. I can't say what it was intended to be used for, whether it's a good use. I can say it's definitely unprecedented. It's definitely a novel use of the clause. And what's interesting is that it could take away CUPE's right to bring litigation against the government related to this bill, because previously a union could sue the government for an unconstitutional bill. But if the bill removes the union's right to bring constitutional challenge, then there's no lawsuit. There's no means to bring litigation against the government. So it'll be interesting to see what remedies, if any, CUPE has. They've certainly been left with very little recourse, in my view, from a legal perspective related to this bill.
Okay, and my final question here, Simone, is the legislation which passed just before the dinner hour, included in it, is that, well, it's quite clear, these education workers will hit the picket line tomorrow. The government is quite clear, as per the litigation, this is an illegal strike. They could fine CUPE, the national union, $500,000 per day. They could fine each individual member, there's 55,000 of them, $4,000 per member per day, just for tomorrow. If the government moved forward with the maximum fines, that's more than $220 million. In your opinion, how likely is this? And of course, even from a logistical perspective, could you imagine thousands of people showing up to court with a fine to fight? It seems for the court system, this would be a logistical nightmare and unlikely, but you're the expert, so you let us know.
That's a good question. I would have a hard time believing that the government isn't going to, in fact, impose fines on every single one of these workers, and of course on the union as a whole. There could be issues, of course, with double recovery there if you're fining each individual member and then, of course, the union as an entity. My understanding is that these fines are meant to be more of a discouragement. They're trying to prevent illegal strikes from happening. Each day, of course, the fines increase, and so I wouldn't be surprised if there's some sort of a deal. The government doesn't impose the fines in exchange for hopefully the workers going back to work sooner. But you're right, it's a lot of workers to issue fines against, and certainly would take a long time to process and see any sort of actual recovery.
Okay, Simone, we appreciate your time and sharing your expertise with us tonight. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, on that note, this rally's wrapping up, but education workers will be on picket lines outside MPP's offices and government offices tomorrow. Back to you.
Christina Tenali reporting live tonight. Christina, thank you.